Hi, I'm Jonathan Weinberg, and this is Drawing with Fountain Pens. Today I'm going to talk about a unusual category of fountain pen in relationship to art, which are pens which are named after artists. I did, in the past, I talked about a pen that was kind of homage to Keith Haring, or uses Keith Haring designed after Haring died, but produced through his heirs and his foundation. But Visconti in particular, I think, has focused on a line of pens, both their Van Gogh pens and the Rembrandt pens. And then, of course, Mont Blanc has a whole series of different pens that focus on writers, but also peculiarly on something that they call the patron of the arts. So it's an interesting kind of phenomenon in which the pen itself writes like other pens, but somehow or other its name and the way it's designed is related to a well-known artist. I have one pen in this Van Gogh series. From looking around the internet, I believe that there are 22 different kinds of Van Gogh pens. This is the Dr. Gachet pen. Dr. Gachet was, I guess we would say today, a kind of psychiatrist who cared for Van Gogh towards the end of his life. And Van Gogh did a famous portrait of him. The pen, in its colors, suggests the color palette of that particular picture. So the pen doesn't write particularly like the way Van Gogh uses ink on paper and the many different range of effects that he gets using things like Japanese reed pens or different kinds of nibs with different shapes to them, things that are more equivalent to stub nibs. It has a fairly traditional nib. I mean, a traditional nib. In this case, it's a medium nib, a steel nib. And it writes very nicely. It's a nice pen for journaling, which is what I mostly use it for, but it has no flex to it, which is something that you probably would want in a pen that is geared for certain artists, or if you were going to try to emulate Van Gogh. I actually have a YouTube video in which I talk about Pilot's parallel pens and how you could use those to sort of get some of the effects that Van Gogh gets in some of his wonderful drawings. This is not a particularly good pen for doing that, and yet it's quite nice. If you do find this information and these interviews useful, don't forget to subscribe and give us a like. That's the way you can support the work that we do. In some ways, the most impressive thing about this pen is the packaging. It comes in this big box, and you open it up, and you get this beautiful close-up detail of Van Gogh's self-portrait. I think Van Gogh's, the interesting thing about Van Gogh, or one of many interesting things about Van Gogh, is that he really only made art for 10 years. He came to art making quite late in his life relative to other artists who often begin when they're kids. Van Gogh is often talked about as being the example of the artist who becomes famous after he dies. But there are many things that are exceptional about his career, one of which was that he was himself involved in the art dealing business before he became an artist, and his brother was a very influential art dealer. He, through his brother and his own connections, he became friends with many of the most important artists of the time, including Pissarro and Gauguin. And so when he did die, it wasn't as if no one knew who he was or didn't know about his paintings. So I think that's something I always try to tell people about. I think one of the worst things you can say to an artist is, you're only going to be famous after you die. It's very deflating. Imagine, let's say, if you were a lawyer or a dentist and somebody said to you, oh, well, you're going to make money after you die. But for some reason, people feel that that's something that's a cool thing to say to artists. Speaking for my artist friends, none of us very much appreciate it. And the truth is, if you don't have connections and if your work isn't really appreciated when you're alive, it's very unlikely that it's going to be appreciated after you pass. So it's really a complicated story. So we often call that sort of the Van Gogh or the Van Gogh, depending on how you pronounce it, myth. Going back to the box, it comes in this beautiful box with Van Gogh's self-portrait, a detail of Van Gogh's self-portrait. And then when you open the box up, you have the pen itself, and you have a close-up of a card that says it's the Dr. Gachet pen. Now, in earlier versions of this pen, you would actually have gotten a much more impressive image of the painting that the pen is supposed to be an homage to. But that's not the case here. And then the pen is here. It comes with cartridges. It also comes with a converter. And it has certain qualities, certain things that are signature elements of Visconti's pen, namely the magnetic cap. That is kind of fun the way it clicks together. You can hear it clicking. The pen is faceted. It has 18 sides to it. It's really attractive. It has this very nice clip that is the shape, which is sort of a trademark of Visconti, is supposed to look like the Ponte Vecchio, the bridge, and remind you that the pen comes from Florence. On the top, the finial, it says Visconti made in Italy. And then along the side, it says Van Gogh. It doesn't actually say Dr. Gachet. On the bottom, it also has a kind of, it's metal again. The part that really is supposed to emulate Van Gogh is the colors of the resin, which I have to say are really quite beautiful and fairly subtle. I don't know how well you can see it, but there's a kind of range of colors, slight white marbleization, dark green, blues, a little hint of brown and red in these colors, which are supposed to be similar to the beautiful portrait that Van Gogh did towards the end of his life, when he was at an asylum in Saint-Rémy-du-Provence in the south of France. And that, of course, is where Van Gogh died. Most people believe that he committed suicide, although there's been some controversy about that. There are actually two versions of the Dr. Gachet portrait. We kind of think of Gachet as being something like a psychiatrist, but really that's a later 20th century kind of idea. He was more of a homeopathic doctor, uh, and he was someone very sensitive to Van Gogh as an artist, someone who was friends with other avant-garde artists and followed the latest kinds of art making that was going on in France at the time. Now, in terms of the box, it's interesting. There was an earlier version of the Van Gogh pen, and when you got that, it's some of the most famous Van Gogh paintings, this Starry Night and I believe the Sunflowers. The top of the box was, in fact, a picture of that painting. Later, in the second edition of the Van Gogh pens, there is the self-portrait detail and then a pen inside. I'm not sure if all the boxes are the same, whether they vary the picture on the cover of the box, but I know from looking at some reviews online of the newer version of the Van Gogh pen that just like this one, the outside painting is not the same as the pen painting, and you really only see the painting on this card that you get, which is sort of kind of, I think, problematic, because I think you should at least see a picture of the whole painting, not just a piece of the painting. But I suppose you can go online and certainly see pictures of it. Not that long ago, this particular painting sold for over $80 million, and at the time was the most expensive painting, I think, that had ever been sold in an auction, but there's since been many others that have been more expensive. But certainly it is quite a famous picture, so it's not hard to find it. But I think that's a little odd. I think there should be a picture of the full painting. The pen is a cartridge converter. It comes with the converter, and here you can see it with the ink in it. We're always looking at how does it compare to the Metropolitan, the Pilot Metropolitan, and here it is, almost exactly the same, a little bit bigger. It posts very well. It has the resin in the top, the front of the pen, the body of the pen, and then the section is metal. I write with it a lot. I don't find it too slippery. I often don't like having a section that is so shiny and smooth, but in this case it's not bad. I find that the pen's a little heavy when you post it, but it also is a reasonable size, so you don't have to post it. Another difference is that the nib is smaller on the newer edition of the pens. It's more like a size 5, and I understand that the earlier pens had a nib that was closer to size 6. Visconti, I think, makes their own nibs, but I've also read online that perhaps some of their nibs are made by Gogh. Anyway, you can't take the same nib that is on the first edition of the Van Gogh pens and put it on the second edition. It has this really, I think the star of Visconti pens is the magnetic closing. And again, the clip is really nice. A difference in the newer pens is that they are laser etched. I think earlier Visconti pens were done with a more traditional kind of engraving. And I think it's a very attractive pen. It retails for more than $200, so it's not cheap. So that is one thing to say about it. But it is very nice looking. Now, how does it write? Well, this is a medium nib. And I think it's reasonably smooth. As I say, it doesn't have much flex to it, but it has a little, get a little variation. This is a very nice ink. This is when Watermen stopped making its brown color, which I used to use a lot. I switched to Monteverde Scotch Brown, which I think is quite good. You can see this is my crude attempt to approximate a Van Gogh style drawing. And Van Gogh would use dip pens, reed pens, pens with all kinds of different nibs that also would have a certain amount of flex. He would not draw with a fountain pen, so he'd get many different kinds of effects. This is the Visconti Van Gogh, or Van Gogh pen, the Dr. Gachet version. This is Monteverde Scotch Brown. And this is Rhodia paper. And let's see. It writes very pleasantly. It's a little dry, but it's okay. I feel like I should write Theo. On a new painting. It is a portrait of Dr. Gachet, who is quite a nice fellow. There is a bit of line variation to the pen, a little bit of feedback. Writes it a little bit dry. So in conclusion, I would say what's nicest about the pen by far is the resin. It really is very beautiful. I also like the prismatic effect of the body. I think that's nice. I think a pen like this should really have a number 6 nib. I think would look better, and it did in the earlier versions of the pen. I'm not quite sure why they decided to go for a smaller nib, particularly given that it's not a cheap pen. On the other hand, I'm not quite sure really, does it really have that much to do with Vincent van Gogh? And there's a kind of peculiar idea that, well, it's an Italian pen, but it is emulating a Dutch artist. And it's interesting. They have another line, less expensive, which is their Rembrandt pen. It's funny. You would think that they might want to focus on a wonderful Italian painter like Raphael or Pontormo or many Italian painters. But for whatever reason, the people at Visconti decided to go after Van Gogh, who, after all, is probably one of the most popular artists of all time. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please do subscribe and give it a like, and I'll see you next time.